name's Joe Tonietto, as Jim said. I'm the owner and president of Waldron's Antique Exhaust. What I'm going to talk about today is how I got into this N11 project and what we did to try to make that muffler right for those of you that have second-gen cars. What I'm going to talk about is how we got started and the quest for the right sound on the N11 mufflers. We'll talk about the process, analyzing some NOS parts, the one prototype build that we did, a physical prototype, how we got the correct muffler case design and how we knew how to build it correctly, the fact and what the GM restoration parts license means to us in this case. And then I want to thank some people for their involvement as well at the end. Where did this all start? There's a guy here who most of you or all of you know, and Tom Comandera started me on this little challenge. He asked me if I can create a specific sound or design a muffler to sound a specific way. And the answer to that is yes. I mean, obviously if you can analyze or if you can determine what the frequency is that you want coming out, what kind of sound and tone you want, yes, you can design a muffler to sound a specific way for a specific vehicle. And the second part of this was Tom hooked me up with your host here today with Werner. Werner's comment was that the off-road mufflers on the market, they just don't sound right. They don't sound like the original off-road mufflers. And that kind of, I love a challenge, I like a quest, and off we went. So the question was, how are we going to recreate the original sound? Luckily, Werner had an NOS, actually a set of NOS parts that we were able to analyze. So we started out looking at the exterior, the obvious things. What's the case size? What's the case shape? What's the volume of the muffler? What were the materials of construction? What were the inlet and outlet configurations and the diameter? And what production case markings were on those mufflers? And then in terms of the interior, we use this little baby, and some of you may have seen this in other experiences in your life or something like it, right? Guess this thing is really slick, right? Guess what that lets us do? I mean, we can get into a welded assembly like those NOS mufflers, and we were able to determine a lot about how they were put together and how they were originally constructed. So we used the fiber optic inspection tools to find out what the tube arrangements were internally in the welded mufflers originally, what were the tube diameters, the internal tube diameters, where were the baffles positioned, and what were their configuration, and then what louver types were in each baffle, and where were the louvers and tubes positioned within the case of the muffler. We built one physical prototype, and what you see here is actually on one of the vehicles that was in this room a few months ago. On the passenger side is a GM part, and on the driver's side here is the kind of the hand-built prototype that we did initially. Cycle through. We built the one physical prototype. What we did was approximate the shape of the original case because I didn't have tooling to build exactly the same case oval at the time. But we matched the internal volume, which was going to be critical in getting the right sound. And then we put this on the vehicle for acoustic evaluation. Ours on one side of the car, GM part on the other side of the car. How close did we come? We started it up and monitored both sides, and we could not tell the difference. We nailed it on the first prototype. And the nice thing about that is, first of all, it didn't cost me that much to have to build a second prototype, but also it meant that all the work we had done analyzing the part and copying it, we were able to predict what it was going to sound like, and we had matched it correct. Then we had to figure out, okay, now how are we going to reproduce exactly the correct case? We had the physical samples that Werner had, and we are also a GM licensee. So there's a couple of things here that really helped us out. Produced was tooling to create the correct 5-inch by 9¼ oval shaped body and the correct length. Well, we found that on this particular muffler there's a raised section that kind of disguises or hides the crease from the inner shell seam. These are all they're a double wall muffler, so there's an inner shell and an outer shell. And the inner shell is seamed together underneath this side. The outer shell, the seam is on the opposite side so that there's no crossover leakage of exhaust gas between the two seams overlapping on each other. So in this case, there's a raised section that hides the crease of the seam on the inner shell. We had to create end cap. This is the end cap, both ends. Stamping dies to create the end caps, and also baffle stamping dies, which hold the internal tubes and create the chambers inside the muffler. And then we also had to create an end cap seaming tool, which basically it's like sealing the lid on a juice can. If any of you are familiar with that, it's the same thing but a lot bigger machine. The benefit of being a GM licensee is we were obviously able to get the designation that this is a GM restoration part, But most importantly was I was able to get the drawing from General Motors on what this part was supposed to look like. And we got the drawing long after we had done the prototype and but before we tooled everything up. But the nice thing about getting the drawing was it confirmed that everything we had analyzed inside and all the dimensions we had come up with were correct. The other thing that was really interesting here, and we had some help from several people here, notable help here on this one, John Hinckley and Jerry Cohn at Corvette Central really helped with the research on this. A lot of the parts that you see on vehicles that people know are old GM parts or they're old original GM parts, a lot of those parts have case stampings on them, identifications on the part, a series of numbers and letters usually in 2 rows. What we were able to determine was that those stamp parts were service parts. They are all of the original installed N11 parts were identified with I believe a bright yellow stenciled identification on the outside of the muffler case. And they're nodding his head. John's got a lot of information that, as part of this whole project, we also had we were working with retirees from Arvin who were able to give us a whole series of information about how to read the Arvin production codes on the outside of the mufflers. And the mufflers that we manufacture right now, the only company buying them is Corvette Central. And there's been a lot of conversation on the NCRS forums, and I've put some stuff out there to clarify what we build and how we build it, and what we went through to create this muffler. Corvette Central is the only one using this configuration. I know other people are selling off-roads, and I know that they can sound pretty good, because really when you dissect this muffler, believe it or not, what this thing ended up looking like inside is a lot like a Corvair turbo muffler. It is a very open, especially for the day, quite an open flowing design. And anybody who's using a internal regular turbo set of baffles would come close, I would think, to what the original sound was. Just an example, I thought I'd throw one up here. It's kind of hard to read, but they always are. I mean, when you get a drawing from GM as a restoration part supplier, this is about as good as they get, believe it or not. This is the service part drawing for the 2-inch standard muffler. And if this works, we got a little short video here. If some of you are familiar with the stink ray, this is Werner's coupe here. By the way, your host was driving that. That is your host driving that. 532 cubic inch big block in there. You hear a lot of air rush. 2 reasons. Number one, it's pumping a lot of air through that muffler, and it's pushing a lot of air out the back, that outlet. So you hear a lot of air rush on this car, and it's also because we had the video recorder, we had the digital video camera at the muffler level, down pretty low and pretty close to the car. So on some of the smaller displacement, there was a fuel injection car that was in here that we also tested with these, a couple other smaller displacement vehicles. You don't hear that wind rush as much. It's a more pure tone and not so much of the air noise. And I want to thank the folks that I mentioned here, and hopefully I caught everybody on the way through, but Tom for really issuing the challenge, John for help with the research and also for the magazine articles, and Jerry at Corvette Central also helped with research on this, supporting the project, and he's also been a very committed customer, but he's been very committed to make the project worth, and he's been great support. And of course, our host here, Werner, having the NOS samples was invaluable to us. I mean, getting the drawings is great, but sometimes the drawings don't always reflect what the ultimate engineering changes were. So having the part in hand and being able to analyze it physically really made a huge difference. And then Werner was very supportive in getting the prototype test done, putting it on cars here. That's it. Just want to say thanks and open it up for any questions. Hopefully I'll answer them.